Hello, and welcome to the first episode of the History Hoard, where we talk about history and remind you that not all dragons wear pants. Today we have my best friend and master of math, Alexis Dean. Say hello to the crowd for me.
Hello, History Hoard. Today we have a very interesting topic for you guys.
And she's got that right. And if there's one thing that I've noticed about history, it's how it's basically turtles all the way down. There's always more to discover. This is true with women's struggles and achievements in history as well. Today's topic: women's citizenship and rights in the 1800s. Now, we know that women were thought of as the lesser, delicate sex, but what was actually going on? Quite a lot, it turns out. The limitations of women's citizenship and rights rested in the gender roles put in place for them, such as being homemakers and mothers with variations depending on their social class. Many, such as male political thinker Alexis de Tocqueville, I will not be pronouncing that right, believed that gender equality would weaken the government and ruin society. As more women joined the workforce, the argument for women's equality grew, strikes broke out, and they would spark many changes. Even before this, their ideas and presence could not be ignored. Therefore, despite these limitations, they affected and shaped the nation. Now, many called the time between 1890s and the 1920s the women's era because this is when women began to have economic and political opportunities, own property, work for wages, and sign contracts. Women have always worked because without them, towns would fall apart while men were off at war. You gotta have your bread, ladies. But this time, it was becoming more common for women to work outside the home on top of their other duties. After all, someone had to raise patriotic American children. Motherhood was idolized, and it became paramount for women to be educated and become role models for an upright society. Women would continue to not be allowed the right to vote, but they had power in their own way, specifically social. Wives to government working men would get individuals to resign from positions by shunning them if their families did not reach the moral standards they expected from them. Basically, high school. Other social powers allowed them to blacklist shops or goods they deemed fit, damaging the profits of shops and making petitions. Knowledge is power, and women became more educated and active. Their voices became louder. This is unsurprising. As John Green puts it turns out that women are not things, they are people in precisely the same way you are a person. Women wanted equality and would also go on to fight for the rights of other minorities. This did not sit well with those in power.
You really have to think about women are really the true ones in power. Pulling the strings and all underneath those government working men. They really had a lot of power. But why were they not allowed to publicly be the face of some of those government decisions?
Well, that's an excellent point, and I have the perfect guy to explain it. Alexis de Tocqueville. Oh, look, you're twinning, same name. Was a French political thinker who believed women in the government were dangerous. He discussed this belief in his writing, How Americans Understand the Equality of the Sexes. According to him, to have a strong democracy, men and women must remain in their separate spheres or risk damaging society. He also states that women do not dislike their position in life. Tocqueville uses his own experience and observations to support his idea. I have never observed that a woman of America consider conjugal authority as a fortunate usurpation of their rights, or that they thought themselves degraded by submitting to it. It appeared to me, on the contrary, that they attach a sort of pride to the voluntary surrender of their own will, and make it their boast to bend themselves to the yoke, not shake it off. He explains how women are physically and morally different than men. It was men's duty to lead and conduct business, and women's to tend to the family. He mentions women are socially inferior, but that America has elevated them intellectually alongside men. He concludes his writing by adding that this understanding of different roles means that American women are superior to those of Europe. Notably, nowhere in this excerpt does he mention asking a woman about their opinion for any of his observations.
Strange how he formed an opinion without really taking in all the perspectives on the subject.
Unfortunately, that's common even today. People just take what they hear at face value and don't try to look up the information.
Yes, and I really do like how he states that we do not dislike our position in life. If we really did like our position in life, we wouldn't be advocating for all of these different changes.
Exactly. If everyone thought the way he thought they did, then there wouldn't be strikes or shouting in the streets. And then,
Hmm.
despite these limitations, they still made an impact on history, one of which was the Lowell Girls' Strike. The gender roles placed on women could only be applied to upper and middle class women. For those struggling to get by, having one income capable of supporting a family was impossible. It's still true even today. This creates a wider disparity between the upper and lower classes. Upper class families could afford to put their kids through schooling and let them be kids. Poorer families had to send their children, often as young as 10 years old, into workhouses and tending to fields to have enough money to keep clothes on their backs. Young girls would be sent away to boarding houses to work in mills for abysmal pay and hazardous conditions. As overproduction of products took over factories, owners started cutting pay. Many strikes, including the Lowell Mill Girls, took place in retaliation for the consistently decreasing wages. Harriet Hanson Robinson was a young girl when she participated in one of these strikes. She talked about how she would listen to the labor reformers give speeches on pumps or soapboxes, demanding better paying conditions. This rabble rousing attitude reached her mill, and the day came when they would all walk out. From the top floor down, each level started to leave one by one. Robinson's floor was hesitant to do so she took the first step, leading her coworkers out as a child. Instead of chants, they sang a variation of I Won't Be a Nun, changing the word nun for slave. However, while this strike shut down the mill temporarily, the demand for jobs exceeded the number of individuals who could afford to withhold work. Soon after the strike, the position of every girl who walked out was filled once more with new bodies. This story is an example of activism failing, but they were part of a movement that would eventually reach the goal to better pay in the future.
And you have to think these girls in these mills were young to the point that they were worked like dogs and they were in very hazardous conditions. Some girls lost fingers and got mangled in those machines.
Exactly, and they didn't have any proper workers' comp or anything of the sort, so if they got injured, they were just out of a job because they couldn't work. It didn't matter that they were hurt in the process, they didn't have the precautions to put in place to protect them from these things. And
And
this,
it's just
oh, sorry.
even more terribly unfortunate that, of course, it failed. Um, all of the jobs that they left just got filled, and they had nothing to really show for it at the moment.
Exactly. Like there wasn't much to do other than to start looking for a new job and hope that the conditions would be better for them. And oftentimes they weren't. And this role of not being able to fit into the women's standards stretched across races as well. Whites in the American Yawp, it states that whites argued that African American women were less delicate and womanly than white women and therefore perfectly suited for agricultural labor. The Southern ideals, meanwhile, established that white plantation mistresses were shielded from manual labor because of their very whiteness. Sojourner Truth discusses it in her speech, Ain't I a Woman, about how if women are supposed to be helped into carriages, why does no one offer a hand for a black woman? Black women, especially slaves, were not held to the same standard as upper and middle class women. Their roles were in the fields and with other slaves to serve their masters. Yet those who could, typically free women, did not back down from speaking about the issues that affected them.
So you do mention other free women who were speaking up about those issues. You've not mentioned them. Do we want to speak about that?
Oh, absolutely. Specifically, Miss Sojourner Truth of New York. We claim her down here in the South, but if she was born today, you better believe she would know how to ride the subway. I do not. Born into slavery as Isabella Baumfree, she escaped from her masters in 1826 with her infant daughter. When she did, she changed her name to Sojourner Truth, which I think was a good move. Much cooler.
I agree.
Truth became an abolitionist, an activist for women's and African American rights, and the first black woman to win in court against a white man for her son's freedom. And you heard me, she won. What she is most famous for, however, is a speech she gave on May 29th, 1851, at the Ohio Women's Rights Convention, Ain't I a Woman? This speech took arguments people made against women's rights and used them against them. For example, if the first woman God ever made was strong enough to turn the world upside down all alone, these women together ought to be able to turn it back. and get it right side up again. Now they are asking to do it. The men better let them. And I'm not gonna lie, I would love to quote the entire speech right now if we had time. It's an amazing piece of literature that still rings true no matter what time frame you're reading it in. She talks about the hypocrisy of how black women are treated compared to whites and uses Christianity to back up her argument. This incredible woman would spend the rest of her life fighting for the rights of her people. Alongside Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Abigail Adams, and countless unnamed women, she did not accept the cards she was dealt. Instead, they changed hands. So, Miss Not Tocqueville, what did we learn today?
We have learned that early women have just been fighting for the same things that current women still are. Even though there's been major progress, we still have not hit that point where it needs to be.
Exactly, like, things are a lot different than they were back then, but a lot of our social structures are still similar. And we can't forget that like it's not just about women that we're often talking about. It's other minorities and people that don't have a say, or because of society's standards it's not proper to bring it up.
Correct. And even thinking about other European countries, cities, like with the other Alexis, he also said that women were more prominent in America than they even were in France.
Exactly. And even American women, they're like, they wanted more rights. They wanted the right to vote. They're like, if we can control the social parts of society like just fine, then why can't we have more responsibilities and power?
Correct. So I think our little Hoard today has learned quite a bit, don't you?
I believe they do. They have a lot to think about afterwards. And tune in next time where we will talk about just a little bit more on American history. And remember to stay hydrated, and that snakes will always be better than hamsters, even better than frogs. And I will die on this hill. Stay happy and healthy.